Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
This week, echoes of the Trump administration from across the Atlantic, as British Prime Minister Theresa May calls for skills-based immigration.
It'll be based not on where somebody comes from, but on how they can contribute to our economy.
And the response from the unlikeliest of places, my conversation with a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist in Storm Lake, Iowa.
The thing that bothers me is that somebody who's willing to cross the Mekong River or the Rio Grande is the kind of person you want in the United States. Somebody who's willing to do anything to get here, anything to make a buck. That's the kind of person you want in the middle of nowhere, to revitalize these places and rejuvenate them.
And later, how to encourage diversity in the workforce for economic success. The immigrant CEO of Chobani Yogurt.
I have nothing against America first. Upstate New York is first, Idaho first. Of course, humanity first too.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America. Regular listeners of Only in America know that I have something of a town crush on Storm Lake, Iowa. It is a kind, compassionate community integrating immigrants and refugees into the social fabric. And honestly, one of the things I remember most about my trip there earlier this year is that I found what might be the best grilled cheese sandwich ever at a little diner in town. It was lightly toasted, perfectly buttered, and just the right amount of American cheese. I think I ate 3 of them. But I digress. Over the last few weeks, we've heard from Storm Lake's mayor and police chief, and this week I am thrilled to have journalist and author Art Cullen as my guest. Art wears many hats at the Storm Lake Times. He is the paper's editor, editorial writer, and along with his brother John, co-owner. Last year, Art won the Pulitzer Prize for, as the judges wrote, editorials fueled by tenacious reporting, impressive expertise, and engaging writing that successfully challenged powerful corporate agricultural interests in Iowa. This week, Art is out with his first book, titled Storm Lake, a chronicle of change, resilience, and hope from a Heartland newspaper. I spoke with Art earlier this year about the history of Storm Lake, how immigrants ended up in the area, and how the new community has benefited the town. We started off talking about how he and John actually got into the newspaper business.
A chain operation owned the Storm Lake Pilot Tribune, and my brother went in and talked to the son of the chain owner, who I think was 19 at the time, and said he would like to buy the Pilot Tribune from the chain because he'd been working in public relations and had grown tired of public relations and missed his editorial soapbox. And so he asked if he could buy it, and the kid told him that he didn't think my brother quite understood business or journalism. And so it so infuriated John that we're 100% Irish. He walked out the door that day and decided he was starting his own newspaper. And he had an infant and a toddler at home, and his wife, of course, thought he was crazy. But he did it, and then he called me in a few months later to help. And so we went from 0 to 4,000 circulation virtually overnight, paid circulation. Now we're about 3,000 circulation, about twice the size of the incumbent.
What was the region like, in the 60s, 70s, 80s?
Well, growing up here, Storm Lake was a lily-white community. We had one person of color that I recall, and his name was Furman Rents, and he was a basketball player at Buena Vista University. He was my hero. And I'd shag balls for him under the basket when they were, shooting around. All those kids wanted to hang around with him. We thought he was Bill Russell, And it was the only person of color we ever saw. I think he probably loved it. He had this little cadre of children following him around, and that was kind of what it was like. It was a union town, a meatpacking town, independent farmers, all who had cows and cattle and chickens and some dairy even. And so it was a much different place than it is today. What accelerated the change was in the mid-1980s, there was a farm debt crisis. which accelerated a lot of things that were already underway in Iowa, hastened the consolidation of farms, drove out the union and meatpacking. The first immigrants came to Storm Lake in the early 1980s, and they were Thai Dam refugees from our conflict in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. So that was really the beginning of the huge metamorphosis in Storm Lake, that went from 99% white to 90% of our elementary school are children of color, and 75% of them are Latino.
So then at that kind of inflection point in the early 80s, the economy is in a really tough spot. You have the beginning of a demographic shift, which triggers a lot of tension that's economic, that's racial. What was that like?
Well, that's certainly true. So it was a confusing phenomenon. If you'd have brought 300 black people into Storm Lake, there could have been some real hard conflict. Or 300 Latinos, 300 young men. There would have been real problems. But we were conflicted because this was called the Iowa Shares Program, and it was started by Governor Bob Ray to transport an entire culture, the entire Thai Dam culture, from refugee camps in Thailand to Iowa. And these were our freedom fighters in Cambodia and Laos. They were hitmen for the CIA. They were dedicated soldiers on our behalf. And over our shame and angst over the Vietnam War, we embraced that entire culture and brought them into Iowa. And the two biggest beachheads were Des Moines and Storm Lake. And so this is one of 4 places in Iowa with a Buddhist temple.
So then we move into the 90s and the 2000s, and migration patterns change, and what does that look like in Storm Lake?
Well, about 1990, the pork plant was rapidly expanding in production. At the same time, the shortage of Anglo workers was becoming particularly acute, and so IBP started putting up billboards at the border and even south of the border, inviting Latinos to come. And they did. Young men came in droves, and it was a lot easier just to go to Mexico and get them. And with NAFTA coming on, kind of the floodgate was open.
And then how did that demographic and cultural change play out in
and
town?
That was a little rougher in Storm Lake. People were getting uptight because people were speaking Spanish in the grocery stores, and whether they were or not, people thought they were using food stamps and things like that. I'm not sure that they were. But again, there's a whole different cultural history going on with Mexico and our conflicts with Mexico and our perceptions of Mexico that are different than our perceptions of the Thai Dam people. And our perceptions of Mexico are formed through Clint Eastwood movies, and whether they're accurate or not. and so there was a different reaction. And again, it was all young men, as opposed to, these were integrated families from Asia coming in. And here we had a bunch of young men from Jalisco primarily.
So the community starts arriving in the 90s and 2000s. Eventually they settle down.
Right.
And then there is this, it feels like, from afar, it feels like there's this stable, some sort of level of stability in the community.
Yeah, and ironically, what happened was there was a huge raid by the Border Patrol and what was then the INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service, in 1996. There was this big raid, and they rounded up the Asians with the Latinos, and they put them in handcuffs, and they had them in pens outside in the sweltering sun like cattle or hogs waiting for slaughter. And everybody in Storm Lake they had helicopters flying overhead, and it was a circus. And Prosser said he'd never work with the Border Patrol again. And he was disgusted by it. It was a human rights violation. And everybody in Storm Lake was appalled, from the banker to the car dealers to the meat cutters to the guy at the bar. When they saw those Asians who were just rounded up because they were people of color, everybody realized this is wrong. And so the local chamber of commerce, the school district, the police department, but we just kind of redoubled our efforts to make this a welcoming place and to realize that our future is tied to these immigrants, because the rest of Iowa, 67 of our 99 counties have lost population every year since 1920. And this is the one community among those rural counties that's actually growing and thriving. In the long run, it's people getting their first foot on the first rung of the ladder to the American success. I mean, that's what it's really about. They're getting paid $16 to $20 an hour, and I don't think that's robbery.
What's different about Storm Lake that there is this growth and there is this sense of, what, the heck with everybody else, we got a good thing going on here?
First, it's always been a university community and a salesman's community. It's centrally located in the northwest quadrant of the state. People here were used to transient populations, people coming and going.
I see.
And we were used to people, a professor with long hair and a beard. It's always been kind of a regional recreation destination, so we always kind of roll with things here. Mm-hmm. I would also say that I think, frankly, that the newspaper played an integral role. Mm-hmm. Because we were constantly campaigning to treat immigrants as neighbors and not as strangers. And
I've read the editorial that you wrote about what is it, Better Day Cafe?
Right.
Did a cross-country trip last summer, and I found myself like 20 miles south, and I said, hey, I've heard of Storm Lake.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of rolled through, and I said, I need a cup of coffee, and
Sure.
I'd see the cafe, and I'd see your editorial there.
He's a great young guy. There's another. That's the reason why Storm Lake's successful, while other businesses are contracting in retail trade in Clay County. All the neighboring counties are shrinking in trade and population, and there's Topiz Martinez with that big smile of his serving you a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. He started at just serving coffee, just by himself, and now he's got 3 or 4 employees, and now he's starting a breakfast thing in there. So,
yeah, I had breakfast there this morning.
Yeah. That's the future of Storm Lake, and there is no future in these dying white communities in rural places.
So you have a new book coming out, Storm Lake, A Chronicle of Change, Resilience, and Hope from a Heartland newspaper. So it's your first book, although I've been led to believe you've written a handful of words
right.
Otherwise. So why did you say, okay, I'm going to sit down and put down 60,000 words?
Actually, it turned out to be about 90.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were lucky enough in April of 2017 to win the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing, and it was about surface water pollution in Iowa. Our farming practices combined with climate change are causing nutrient levels in our surface waters to spike, and it's causing real problems for the city of Des Moines, which is having to clean up all this commercial farming fertilizer out of its water. Mm-hmm. So we won for a series of 10 editorials about a lawsuit that was filed by the Des Moines Water Works against 3 northwest Iowa counties, agricultural counties. Shortly thereafter, about 3 days after we won the Pulitzer, I got a call on the same day from 2 New York publishers asking if I'd like to write a book. And I laughed them both off and said, you're crazy, I can't write a book. And I can only write 700 words at a time. My brother told me to call him back, and so I did. And I ended up with a deal from Viking, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House, about all the stuff we're talking about, the kind of the cultural history of Iowa and Storm Lake, and how it's been transformed for the better.
What are the challenges that the city will struggle with in the years ahead?
First of all, the immediate struggle is housing. We don't have quite a high enough wage here to justify new housing, and that's a real problem in rural America generally. Our housing stock is disappearing and deteriorating because of a lack of income. And I think going forward, it's going to become a challenge very soon, is leadership. We're just starting to see Latinos on the school board and the city council. Staking their claim in democracy, I think, is really important in the next 5 to 10 years. But it's really difficult when there's a constant assault out on you, and even if you're a citizen, you fear being arrested, which is not a fear in Storm Lake. If you just got in from San Antonio, you don't know that Mark Prosser's cool.
I've seen this kind of play out in other parts of the country too, with smaller towns and cities that are, that have really worked hard at integrating their immigrant population. At some point, that population, the way I think about this is that they identify as residents of Storm Lake.
Right.
They integrate as citizens of the U.S. And then ultimately, they're influencing the system, private sector, public sector. And that challenge of kind of that political tension is real. And, if a city or town can figure that out.
It's just starting now.
Yeah.
And so our experience is really, and so, and that you would suspect it would take, about that long of time for the next generation to emerge. And, considering that a lot of the people, the Latinos who came here, had no better than a 3rd grade education. Now their children are going to Buena Vista University for free.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First generation college students from Storm Lake get a full ride to Buena Vista University.
No kidding.
Now that's how you make the community transformation.
Absolutely.
And in 5 years, you get a high school diploma and a community college Associate of Arts degree from Storm Lake High School and Iowa Central Community College. So, and then they are set up then to transfer immediately to BV.
Yeah.
With a year or two already in.
That's amazing.
Right.
I mean,
and it works. It
yeah.
really works. You see it in Storm Lake. If you walk up and down the main street, you'll meet Topes. You'll see the Mexican bakeries that are successful.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just starting to get into the banks,
mm-hmm.
you know, but it's going to take a while. You know, the police department can't find Latino officers
mm-hmm.
because Miami needs them too.
Yeah. You know, what does the future of Storm Lake look like? We talked a little bit about the political representation, economic changes.
Well, there's a lot of challenges going on right now because of this political instability and hard-headedness and lack of pragmatism. But, you know, for example, we have to build a $30 million early childhood education building for grades preschool through first grade. Because we have too many babies, which is it's a rare problem in Iowa. Mm-hmm. This is the most elderly state in the country. You know, there are physical demands and fiscal demands that are placed on the community that have to be addressed, but then the state legislature eliminated the sales tax for school construction, knowing full well that Storm Lake needed that money. Mm-hmm. And it had already been in place, everybody liked it, but the legislature just said, we'll just eliminate that.
Wow.
And it was just this year. That whole project is now on ice. You know, we could really start rocking here if they'd let us. You know, when we're cranking out kids with college degrees, and if you'd make them these dreamers citizens, can you imagine what they'd do? Yeah. The thing that bothers me is somebody who's willing to cross the Mekong River or the Rio Grande is the kind of person you want in the United States. Somebody who's willing to do anything to get here, anything to make a buck. That's the kind of person you want in the middle of nowhere, mm-hmm. you know, to revitalize these places, rejuvenate them. But we buy into these false narratives that are built around maintaining power structures.
Can Congress, much less the national political debate, ever regain a sense of pragmatism?
We've got to address the declining prospects in rural America, because that's what's feeding this xenophobic phenomenon.
Yeah.
This isn't a problem of Philadelphia and the Eagles. This is a problem of Kansas and Missouri and Iowa, and the very places that need these people are the very places that are most virulently opposed to it. And it's because they see these Mexicans as taking something away from them that they never really had. When you've been under somebody's boot that long, you know, you begin to think that it's the brown guy over there that's causing the problem. It ain't the man.
We've been boiling this down as Americans have three fears when it comes to immigration. They're cultural, security, and economic. And try to distill this down to three questions I'd love your response to. Culturally, the question is, are immigrants integrating as Americans or isolating? From a security perspective, are immigrants threats or protectors? And then from an economic perspective, are they givers or takers?
Well, in Storm Lake, they're integrating because they're going on prom dates, white kids and black kids. And the second one was?
Threats or protectors? I
think they're seen as neither. I think the police would argue that they're protectors because they're eyes and ears. And yet other people would see that poor people are threats to my economic security.
Which gets you to the givers or takers.
Right. And they're takers.
Yep.
But in Storm Lake proper, I think you'd say people would tell you, I think most people would say they're givers. Mm-hmm.
So you said before that this is and I completely agree, is that this tension, this fear, this anxiety comes from rural and I would argue also suburban America, where their communities they don't have the number of immigrants that others do, so they don't have that cultural experience, and maybe a handful, that's changing slowly but surely, but it's changing just enough.
White people are now moving into inner cities, and people of color are moving out to suburbs.
Right. It's which just rattles the cages of folks who've been there forever. How do you have this conversation with rural America that, immigrants are a net benefit? I mean, your community is shrinking because there aren't any immigrants there.
That's what I write about in the book. I walk into this cafe in Rockwell City, Iowa, population 2,000, and the only thing it has going for it is a prison and a subway on the highway. And I find a bar and grill in town because all the Main Street diners have been put out of business by the subways. And on the courthouse square, there's still an old biker bar left where you can get a hamburger. Mm-hmm. And I walked in there, and there's a guy my age in a crew cut and a t-shirt. And the normal Iowa convention, wherever you go, is you say hello to everybody and smile. You wave at them if you're in the car, even people you don't know. If you might have noticed it.
Yeah.
And that's what we do here. And I walked into this place, and he looked up at me, and I'm wearing a blazer and my white shirt, and I look like a lawyer or a college professor. And I said, smiled and said hi, and he didn't smile, and he didn't say hi. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking down at him, and he thinks, you know what, that guy's been looking down at me since I was in junior high school. Yeah. And that's what it's about. It's they want to flip the bird to the world, and they think Steve King's doing it, and Donald Trump's doing it, because the world's been passing them by, and nobody's given them a free break. And so they think, what about me? And it's because we've watched our prospects slip away from us for the last 50 years. And I think it's wrong to say it's the white male experience. It's not. In our case, it's the entire 67 counties of Iowa whose best days were in 1920. And there's no way out because of the corporate cabal that controls this state, led by the Koch brothers and Monsanto. How do you break out of that paradigm? I don't know. And but it really does inhibit the conversation. They think that the Mexican put them in digging that ditch, and maybe it was because there are no prospects here, because they've decided that all the cattle should be raised in Kansas and not Iowa.
And I also think, so we as an organization operate in this interesting space where we try to hold on to a center, and we've got a lot of colleagues to the political left.
Right.
And what I'm always trying to make the case to folks is that, listen, when the traditional immigrant rights community movement raises up and says, this is our right and we demand it, that person, they feel like something is being taken away. Because they see this change happening, they say, you know what, those immigrants in that city are taking something that should be mine. You can talk, there's so many examples of kind of the language and the way that these things are discussed. And I think that ultimately the policy outcome that people could be pushing for is very similar, but the language that we use is so fundamentally different and triggers us.
Right. When you're surrounded by undocumented people who, like I am, and they bring food to your house, and you get to know their kids and everything. I mean, that's how the conversation changes. Yeah. But we've got, at one time there was, in the Midwest at least, everyone was aspirational for the middle class. Even wealthy people wanted to be middle class. They really didn't want to be wealthy. Wealthy people here drive pickup trucks so they can look like they're middle class. They only bring out the Mercedes when nobody can see it. We got away from that, where everybody was middle class. There was no grinding poverty in Iowa. There wasn't. And there was no uber wealth in Iowa, at least not on display. And now there is. That's a cultural change. But you lose those traditions as you lose those communities. Yeah. And we're losing those communities rapidly in rural America. And that's what's feeding, I think, the whole Trump phenomenon, is that people in California and New York and perhaps Chicago and Dallas don't understand that people here think they're flying over us and dumping their sewage on us while they fly. And so they see that system is what's bringing immigrants into their community.
Because those people in those big cities, they love immigrants, and but the immigrants are coming to Iowa and taking
Tyson,
my stuff.
Tyson is some faceless giant from Arkansas, and IBP was a faceless giant. Yeah, and how do you fight Tyson? You can't fight Tyson. You can't fight Monsanto, that depopulates rural Iowa and poisons our water. And drives smart people out of this state.
But you can fight immigrants.
You can fight that Latina, because she can't fight back.
Last request of you. Name of the podcast is Only in America.
Yeah.
So I ask everybody to finish the sentence. Only in America, ...
Could a country newspaper editor take on the agribusiness cabal and win a Pulitzer Prize out of the middle of nowhere?
Fabulous. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's been real nice talking to you.
Art Cullen is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and now the author of Storm Lake, a chronicle of change, resilience, and hope from a Heartland paper. There's more about Art at our website, immigrationforum.org.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
This is Only in America, and I'm Ali Nurani. Remember those movies where prisoners are rounded up out of their beds and moved under the cover of darkness? Well, this ain't the movies. In the New York Times, Caitlin Dickerson reports that in shelters from Kansas to New York, hundreds of migrant children have been roused in the middle of the night and loaded onto buses with backpacks and snacks. Caitlin wrote, "They're taken on a cross-country journey to their new home, a barren tent city on a sprawling patch of desert in West Texas." She went on, "These midnight voyages are playing out across the country as the federal government struggles to find room for more than 13,000 detained migrant children." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Prime Minister Theresa May is overhauling Britain's immigration system with a plan centered around the idea of cutting low-skilled immigration. Her proposal comes amid the torrid debate over Brexit, and she's doubtless hoping to placate some of the anti-immigrant sentiment which fueled the British vote to leave the European Union.
Well, the policy on immigration that we're announcing today delivers on the vote of the referendum and takes back control of our borders. It ensures that we bring an end to free movement once and for all. And for the first time in decades, it will be the UK government determining how many people who can come to the United Kingdom. And yes, this system will be based on skills. It'll be based not on where somebody comes from, but on how they can contribute to our economy. And I think that's important. We do still want to bring net migration down to those sustainable levels, as we've promised in the past. What this does, it enables us, leaving the European Union, enables us to be able to make decisions about who can come and the numbers who can come from the European Union, which of course we previously haven't been able to do.
As many callers to the BBC soon pointed out, the move will likely have a huge impact on the strawberry farms and apple orchards of England, who rely on immigrant labor, just like the farms across America. I guess Britain is just like the US in that we both need the skilled farm worker and the skilled engineer. Meanwhile, the Miami Herald reminded us of the thousands of tragic human stories spawned by the Trump administration's new immigration initiatives. Reporter Brenda Medina told them a story of Maria Hernandez and her Nicaraguan-born husband, Oscar, who crossed the border without documents 14 years ago. They'd waited for 3 years for an appointment with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Office in Miami to confirm their marriage is legitimate. To their appointment, they brought with them an album of photos of their wedding and family, their marriage certificate, and a joint bank statement.
Yo iba muy confiada a la cita de migración, porque era una entrevista, supuestamente. Por mi mente nunca pasó que se lo iban a llevar a él.
I was very confident going into my immigration appointment because it was just an interview. It never crossed my mind that they would take him. The official told me to wait in the lobby. 20 minutes later, they returned and told me they detained my husband, that ICE had taken him. He's my support in every way.
Oscar has been married to Maria for 3 years. Now, he's in a detention center in Broward County, facing deportation. So let me end this week with a reason why America is better than what the Trump administration is doing to immigrant families. Hamdi Ulukaya came to the U.S. from Turkey in 1994 to study English and take a few business classes. In 2005, he purchased an abandoned yogurt factory and went on to create Chobani, a yogurt empire that is creating jobs in rural America, saving towns, and, quite frankly, feeding families. Now he's launched a nonprofit called Tent Partnership for Refugees. He told CNN this week that he hopes that America, or as he calls it, Magic Land, doesn't get damaged.
Look, we see it in Europe, At the same time, we see it here. We see it in the region as well, this kind of conversation. And people are having conversation. Politics and policies are changing. And it's this environment today, it might be different tomorrow. And I've seen it throughout the last 20, 30, 40 years, what happened in this term, what happened in this years, what happened in this years. And that's why I decided to go after the most important population, the business community.
You're trying to keep your head down and just do the right thing.
Exactly.
But people have attacked you, right?
Yeah.
They have said that you're trying to make Muslim colonies in certain parts of America. How does that make you feel?
Sad in the beginning, but then what happened after? Then you see all the communities that coming out and talking the reality, and then you see the letters and the emails are coming from all parts of the country. That's louder. Was louder for me.
Here's to humanity. I'm Ali Nirani. That's it for this week's edition of Only in America, which comes from the staff of the National Immigration Forum. The producers are Regina Medina and Emily Chow, and the executive producer is Kathleen Farrell. I'm Ali Nirani. Until next week.